Hang on. I think it's recording. Right. So the reason I wanted to get you on was because I wanted to know about you. I've heard, so basically, let me start again. This is the first sort of time I've done this sort of thing. You have to forgive me. Right. So I've seen your video a few years ago where you were speaking in the European Parliament and you were speaking about the banks being insolvent and the whole fiat currency due to collapse, all that sort of thing. Right, and I was just, I looked you up. I see that you'd been in the army, and then you went into banking a little bit after that. And I was just wondering, like, how, how, how do you know this sort of stuff? Like, I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm saying like, where's the knowledge come from, sort of thing.
Well, basically, the army is a small thing.
Right.
I'm of a generation where you did a little bit of army. These days, you do go to university to toss it off and get pissed, and you know, think fashion changes. So I just had a little bit of time in the army, but I was 40 years in the city of London as an investment manager.
Right.
So that's who I know about banking and fiat currency, so on and so forth. As a side to that, of course, I was also an associate member of the Royal College of Defence Studies and other things. So I've really got two hats. One is a geopolitical international strategist. I'm trained in that. I'm qualified in that. And I'm also an investment manager, and I'm qualified in that. So right. I've had a two. That isn't because I'm clever, Jim. That's because I'm old.
Right. Okay. I'll take your word for that. Okay. So the reason you know that the banking system's due to collapse is because you've been inside it. You've seen it from the inside, and you know
for many years.
For many years, and so yeah, recently you've been calling out the World Economic Forum for all their sorts of foul play. I've noticed.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think that the current sort of the way that they're moving now, the way that their strategies are unfolding, do you think that it is interconnected with the collapse of the financial system? Do you think it's a coincidence that they seem to be happening at the same sort of time?
No, I don't. I think what they want is a globalistic government. They're quite honest about that. It isn't a conspiracy theory. Right. You've just got to get onto their website. And they've been saying this for years. They believe in global governance. They believe in a complete reset. They believe in a different form of currency and a different form of international banking. This is what they're after. It's all on their website. There's no conspiracy, swivel-eyed conspiracy theory about this. They've made it all very clear. Now, what they've been doing very cleverly is been grooming young people who they have selected perhaps for greater things. They think they might come to greater things. So that this view of life, this view of our planet, will suddenly manifest itself in people who are world leaders. And that's exactly what's happened. And if you look at people like Trudeau, Boris Johnson, and not just in the political field, of course, you can look at others as well. You can look at the Archbishop of Canterbury, our new king. They have all been groomed and are sponsored by the World Economic Forum for a globalist agenda. Now, you might argue that's a good thing, or you might argue that's a bad thing. But it's important that people understand that that is the goal. And if they don't understand that,
sorry to interrupt quickly there. I just think it's also important that where all this stuff sort of stems from, like the Club of Rome, etc., they're all Malthusian, and although it is a globalist agenda and plot, fundamentally it is to get rid of humans. So, do you agree with that? Or
well, they are Malthusians, yes, certainly, but they've said so. It isn't a question of me having an opinion on this. They have made it very clear. The Duke of Edinburgh, who I work with on a committee in a completely different field, for example, made it very clear that he thinks there are too many people on the planet. He's on record. He's on. You know, you can find that. It's easy. It's the same with Bill Gates and the global oligarchs. They are Malthusians. They think there are too many people on the planet given the resources. Now, what is particularly interesting is they don't mean them. And the royal families, they breed like rabbits. But they don't mean them. They mean us. They mean ordinary people. We've got to be culled, not them. And that's all fascinating. We have to curtail our holidays when we fly abroad for the sunshine. They fly everywhere in private jets.
But
they want us to eat bugs, and they sit down to Aberdeen Angus steaks. This is about us. It isn't about them.
They've literally, like, without having to go too much detail into it and try and get the channel taken down, they've literally tried to genocide everyone by way of this jab. Though I would suggest, like, this whole thing, just the propaganda campaign by itself should be a red flag for them to put so much money and so much effort into trying to get people to take something that was not tested, and it had there was no sort of understanding for what long-term effects would be on people. Like, it's not okay. They are saying they want to curtail people's traveling abilities and their freedom of movement, but I would suggest it's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot more sadistic, and like they're doing it now. I watched a video of yours yesterday, sorry, just to go on a little bit, and you were saying that you sounded a bit black-pilled. You're saying like you didn't have much hope for this year. You wanted it to be better than last year, but there isn't much hope. And I just wondered, because you come from a political background as well as your banking, I just wonder, do you honestly think I'm going right off subject now, so I do beg your pardon, but do you think there is any political solution for where we're at?
Yes, it's interesting. The world is now dividing into two halves, and that is the Western European and Anglosphere, which is basically, if you will, Central and Western Europe and North America, and Australasia. That's on the one side. And on the other side is something called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and BRICS. So that's Africa, South America, and China and Russia and the stans. That's over that side. Now, the World Economic Forum has great sway over the West, but the West is in decline. It is the West that is going bankrupt. It is in the West that GDP is collapsing. It is in the West that fiat currencies are collapsing. It is in the West that banking is collapsing. So what we're dealing with here is a collapsing side of one side of the globe, and the other side of the globe, which is growing. They don't have greenery. They don't have green rubbish. They're burning oil. They're burning coal. Our wind turbines are made in China and the East. And they are constructed with coal and oil. So all this is nonsense. But of course, the Greens are socialists and communists, and this is great because they also share the WEF goal of destroying Western society as we know it.
But the Conservatives was just they've entered into just as many agreements with, like, the Paris Agreement and all this sort of thing, to net 50 by net zero by 2050 and the rest of it. Like, there is no sort of opposition. They're all on the same track. This is why I'm saying, is there a political solution when they're all doing the same stuff, like the politicians?
Well, yes, because it's going to collapse. It's going to collapse. People are going to freeze. People are going to become unemployed. It's going to be a disaster. And so consequently, yes, in the fullness of time, it will collapse, and the people will then, and they're very slow to wake up, realize what's being done to them. They don't realize that at the moment. They're going about their business. They're blinkered. 80% of the electorate is fundamentally stupid, but you already know that. But one day they'll wake up and they'll go, just a minute, we've been conned. They're beginning to realize very slowly they're being conned by experimental spike protein. They suddenly realize excess deaths. People are dropping dead all over the place. Young people, sportsmen. Sooner or later, all the stupid people will wake up, and then you'll see your political change, and they will throw out these World Economic Forum people. That isn't going to happen soon, but it will be happening eventually. It must.
But you honestly think that can happen via politics without any sort of having to be physical or violent or anything like that. It can be political.
I didn't say that. Did I? When did I say that?
No, you didn't say that. You said it's all going to come crumbling down, is what you said.
Yeah. Oh, there will be violence. Yes, of course there will. We saw violence in the French Revolution, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
We saw violence in the Soviet Union, the Russian Revolution in 1917. We've seen revolution all the time, violent revolution. Oh, yes. Some countries will take to the streets and there will be violence. It's very much less likely with Britain because we're not really quite prone to that kind of thing. But certainly will happen in places like Italy and France, and maybe even Germany. So, yeah, there will be violence, there will be upheaval. All these things will happen. What I'm saying is I don't think it's going to be before Easter, but this will happen in the fullness of time.
Right. So do you think, with that being said, do you think that because you're saying there will be upheaval in places like France and Italy, so because this is a global issue, do you think once they've fallen in other sort of Western states, like their sort of power and their stranglehold on things will sort of dissipate?
Yes, it will, because we are now the past. We are in the past now. We've gone. Our days have gone. The days of the West have gone. It is the rising of the East, the Shanghai cooperation. There's new currencies coming forward. There's the gold exchange coming in Moscow. GDP is growing. Who suffered from the sanctions against Russia? We did.
Yeah.
We did. We're the ones that suffered. We want their fertilizer. We want their oil. We want their gas. They only want our BMWs and they want our Audis. They can do without BMWs and Audis. No problem at all. We can't do what they've got to sell us. So we will either disappear and crumble, or we will have to come to terms. This isn't a question of an opinion or hypothesis. This must happen. There is no other route it can go. The only thing we don't know is how soon that's going to happen. Don't forget, cost of living is going up here dramatically, but that isn't so in the East. In the Shanghai cooperation side, they don't have inflation. Their inflation is still only 2%. Ours is 11 and 12. Their currencies are more stable. They've got more gold than we have. They're not strapped down with welfare systems like we are. They don't have green politics like we do. They are overtaking us at a very rapid rate. And soon we will be on the back seat.
Within 10 years?
Oh, certainly, yes.
5 years?
No, I couldn't be any more close than 10 years. Certainly, I would suspect 5 years would not be a bad guess.
All right. So what sort of, obviously, I know you're into investments, into gold and things like that, but I deal with a lot of people. Well, I know, I don't say I deal with, I'm not a social worker, but I speak to a lot of people that are from like not very well off backgrounds, or they don't have sort of, they're living paycheck to paycheck wherever the paycheck comes from, and they haven't really got a disposable sort of funds to get any gold or any precious metals. Is there any sort of thing you could do realistically, being a bit poorer, do you suppose, like to sort of prepare for this sort of thing that's going to happen?
They're in a very difficult place. They're in a very difficult place because we have had a very hostile environment to savings over the last generation or two generations. Savings are taxed, savings are discouraged, whereas if you go to Japan and you go to the East, you go to China, savings are very high. Our tax is very high. Poor people in this country have a very difficult time because they can't break out. They're heavily taxed and suppressed from savings. So they live from paycheck to paycheck or welfare check to welfare check. And this is the problem. They're in a difficult place. But this has always been in order to suppress the indigenous population's working class, who are politically homeless. If you were old Labour, if your grandfather, for example, was old Labour and voted Labour all his life, nobody's looking out for him. He has no powerful trade union. He has no political party looking out for him. Nobody's looking out for him. The only people who are being looked after in this country are people who are in the public sector, the people who are already rich, and immigrants. Ordinary people are put to the sword. So you're right, and I wish I could hold out more help for the ordinary working Joe who's been screwed now for somewhere in the region of 60 years. It's a terrible shame. What can they do? Well, I don't know. What they've got to do is start manning up a little bit. Give you an example on my latest website and my latest video. What small way can they push back? What small way can they push back? Stop paying the BBC. That's a start. Don't pay the BBC. It's 150 plus quid a year. That's the first thing they can do. Don't pay the bastards.
What about
Don't
the
pay.
council tax?
Yeah, don't pay that either.
Yeah, Godfrey Blue, don't pay your council tax. Thank you.
Yeah, but there's got to be lots of us doing it.
Yes,
we've all got to do it.
This is what I've been advocating for: is literal pushback and sort
We've
of,
got to strike.
Yes, 100%.
We've got to strike. And if they say in our towns like Oxford or Bath or Canterbury, you can't drive from that zone to that zone of your own town, take off your number plate. You just take off your number plate.
Right.
But this means we've all got to stand up and be counted. Yeah. We've got to make men of ourselves here. Yeah. You can't just take it up the arse all the time.
Yes, no, you can't. No, thank you. Yeah, right. Well, I agree. Well said, sir. So can I talk a little bit about the army? Because you said it was a little part of your life. Can we talk a little bit about what happened in the army? What you got up to?
Yes, not very exciting. Not very exciting. Just to explain a little bit, in the 1960s, most people didn't go to university. And if you wanted a job in the City of London, don't forget national service had only just finished. All right. So, for example, your big boss, the director, would have been a wartime soldier.
Right.
Your middle management were national service soldiers.
So you're saying it's a door opening thing?
Yeah, very much so. And if you were like me, a young man in 1967, when national service had finished, there were a number of options. A short service commission, short period of time in the army, territorial army service, and these things all came together. So when you were in your job, you had something in common with your boss and your boss's boss. You had that little bit of background, and they say the British Army is the most exclusive club in the world. It certainly used to be the most exclusive club in the world. And if you had that little bit of background, to use a phrase at the time, it meant you were a proper chap. You were a proper chap. And don't forget, see, I started on at Lloyd's of London, insurance broking and underwriting and things like that. I was on the investment side, but your word was your bond. That was the phrase of the stock market, and the insurance market worked under something called uberrima fides, which is your Latin for utmost good faith, and it was done on a handshake. It had to be done on a handshake. You didn't have time to go to lawyers or wrap it up with lawyers in those days. It was a handshake, and you had to be a proper chap. Otherwise, what was the point of the handshake? If nobody knew who you were or your family or your background, your handshake was meaningless. But if they knew you were in the County of London Yeomanry Regiment, for example, and you went to a reasonably plausible school and all the rest of it, they knew that your handshake meant something, because if you broke your word, you'd be socially ostracized. Right. Now, it sounds very snobby now, but it worked. It worked. All right. Now you don't know who's in the City of London. They're all crooks and spivs.
No, you're right. No. All right.
And so that was it. But it wasn't heavy breathing. It wasn't important in any way. It was just what we all did then. Nowadays, everybody goes to university. It doesn't matter what university does it. I mean, there are universities like Oldham University, Huddersfield University. All these universities, they're Mickey Mouse. They're Mickey Mouse. And you still won't get in to the city with a Mickey Mouse degree from a Mickey Mouse university. If it isn't Oxford, Cambridge, or Durham, or Worcester, or something, or one of the better, or Bristol, you can whistle Dixie for a job.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. So on your thing, on your Wikipedia page, beg your pardon, on your thing, it says that you was a commissioned officer.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
So what can you explain a little bit about that? What that means?
Well, certainly, yes. The rank structure is quite straightforward in the army, and that is you can go in as a private soldier if you so choose and work your way up through the ranks, corporal, sergeant, warrant officer rank, or you can join as an officer cadet and go through Sandhurst and work your way up through that. Now, in my time in the 60s, if you were young, you normally did a couple of years in the ranks. So you were in the ranks for a couple of years, just so to learn the ropes.
Private, you mean, in the ranks?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Or a trooper in my case. And then after a few years, you applied, if you wanted to, you applied for a commission, and you went in, as I did in my case. I went to see the commanding officer, and I said, I've kept my nose clean for a couple of years. Is there any chance of becoming a lance corporal? And he said, no, there's not much chance of that. They're far too important. I can't make you a lance corporal. He said, but I tell you what I could do. I could put you forward for a commission. I said, well, fair enough. Then I'll be an officer instead. But it's a funny world, the old days of the British Army. And then, of course, your only job in those days as an officer was to leap out of the trench, toot your horn, and die bravely. I was selected for that kind of role. I can't put a shelf up. I'm absolutely bloody useless at anything. All I can do is die bravely and go over the top first. That's what my job was.
See, that's very interesting you say that, because I thought this was the reason I had to ask, was because I was of the understanding, it's because when you said that it was to open doors sort of thing, I was to get into the city. I thought to be a commissioned officer, you had to be someone to start with, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? I thought you had to be someone's son or grand. Do you know what I mean? Like,
you don't now, but you did then to a very large extent. My father was a fighter pilot in the war. My grandfather was the Royal Horse Artillery. So I come from a fairly long line of officers, although my mother was a senior NCO. So I've got a bit of a mix myself.
Non-commissioned officer.
Yeah, she was a sergeant.
So
my mother was a sergeant in the WAC.
Through the thing. She worked her way up through.
She worked her way up, yeah.
All right, fair play. So you got a big background of the military, then, the services.
Well, don't forget, everybody of my age has.
Yeah, cool.
It's an age thing, because all my parents, my aunts and uncles and godfathers were in the war. Everybody was, unless you were a conscientious objector. Everybody was in the war, so it wasn't a big deal.
I've got another question on that note then. So if everyone in your family is from a sort of military background, would I be right in assuming as much as that you would have some sort of family? Because this is sort of it's got multi prongs, this sort of question. So first bit is we understand and we agree that the globalists are a problem and they've got all their plans out in the open. Then what I would ask with that is, would secret societies, do you think secret societies have got any sort of stake in what's going on? Like, for instance, the Freemasons, and like, do you think we could have, like you're saying about this revolution that's going to happen, it could well be physical, violent, obviously most revolutions are. Do you think like we can have transparency and integrity within society from our politicians, whilst there are overarching angles and tentacles from other societies, secret or not? Do you see what I mean by that?
Yes, I do. We have a number in this country, and I'm sure there are others in other countries. Certainly Freemasonry is international, and that's been around for hundreds of years. Special handshakes and nod and a wink and all that kind of thing. And that's always been rampant in things like the police force. Very heavily into the police force. There's another organization which a lot of people don't know about. It's called Common Purpose. That is another organization which has deeply infiltrated the civil service. And so, these are, and then of course we've got the World Economic Forum, which grooms its own via some of these agencies, particularly Common Purpose. And then you've got surrounding the World Economic Forum, the other organizations. You've got the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, which are all owned then by big corporations. So the World Health Organization is owned by Big Pharma. So they actually invent their own drugs, bring their own drugs to market, and regulate their own drugs. You couldn't invent any of this. I'm stunned, personally, that anybody would submit themselves to experimental spike protein the way that they have. 80% of the population got a jab. What was going on in their minds? If you take a risk assessment, look, your risk assessment, there was no chance of you dying of COVID. Zero. It was virtually zero, unless you were 80 and already ill. All right. So nobody died, which is why we didn't see stretchers and people dead in the streets. We didn't see like the plague of the 1300s and the 1600s and even the Spanish flu of 2018. There was none of that. But people were running around with masks getting jabbed. Just how stupid are these people? And now, of course, they're dying in droves.
I mean, I don't mean to press you and do you nothing, but this is what I mean. So I'm trying to say, can we have an honest society whilst there are secret societies pulling the strings in the background?
In the West, I suspect probably not yet, not for a while. But when you say globalists, as I say again, we have to remember we're only talking about part globalists. The Russians and the Chinese and the Indian subcontinent don't want anything to do with this. So we're talking about globalists, but there are 3 times as many people in the Shanghai Cooperation Zone, Africa and BRICS. 3 times as many people as there are in the West, Western Europe, Central Europe and North America. So the big numbers of people aren't within the World Economic Forum zone anyway. So they will go, they will fade away, they will die. Klaus Schwab's an old man. He will die. George Soros is an old man. He will die. And these people will eventually fall off their perches. So it will die out. It will die out. But as I say, I don't know when.
I mean, do you know much about Albert Pike?
No, I don't.
He wrote about 3 world wars before the First and Second World War, and he was supposed to be a 33rd degree Freemason. And I'm not going to go through the thing for you, but the thing that's really interesting is the fact that these sorts of people, these high up degree Satanists, fundamentally is what they are. They control all sort of sides. That's their thing. Like if they so like you were saying that Russia and China, they don't want no part in the globalism. They've got their own agenda. That may be true, but at the same time, that agenda that they're seeing out or looking to see out is the brainchild and the thoughts of other people that are actually pulling the strings, which some would argue would be the secret societies of the world.
Well, it's a theory, it's a hypothesis, but you see, China, in spite of what the propaganda from Washington would lead you to believe, China is broadly speaking non-expansionist. The Russian Federation is broadly speaking non-expansionist. Who has the biggest overseas military bases in the world? The Americans. They have 800 overseas military bases and 200,000 overseas personnel in 11 aircraft carrier groups. And if you look at a map of the world, you'll find them on my website where all these bases are. The reason they've shut down Russia Today and Sputnik and all the other Russian channels that we used to get here is because you can only have one side of the story. You're not allowed to have 2 sides of the story. So at the moment, everybody is only getting the Washington case. And consequently, they believe it because there's no dissent. So they're just believing one side. But there are 2 sides. There are 2 sides to every argument, to every war. And so we end up with the war in the Ukraine, which is totally unnecessary and doesn't need to happen at all. We could solve it in the morning by letting the Eastern Donbass and the Crimea have an internationally regulated plebiscite. They're Russian. They want to be Russia. They want to be with the Russian Federation. Let the Ukrainians in the West maintain the Ukraine, but demilitarize, no American bases, no American soldiers, no American bioweapons, and we could stop the war in the morning to the benefit of everybody in the Ukraine, Russian and Ukrainian alike. This war is unnecessary, but most wars are unnecessary. They make a lot of money, they cost a lot of blood, they cost a lot of treasure, but we're in perpetual warfare, aren't we, run by the Americans. Panama, Grenada, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, the Horn of Africa. It goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And yet we blame Putin. You couldn't invent this because the man in your local pub reads the Daily Express and believes it because he's stupid.
Do you think the soldiers, do you think with everything that's gone on with this experimental gene therapy, do you think the soldiers are going to be part of the people that are going to wake up soon and think, you know what, F this, like we're cannon fodder for bankers basically, and we like, or is there gonna is the army a whole process of indoctrination of answering orders and being what's it called, subservient to your higher ups?
Yeah, you're right. Basically, the army soldiers, officers are told. They just do as they're told. They're trained, they're brought up to do as they're told. And what's happening at the moment is they're just sent to get their jab. Sproggins, it's you're due for your jab, and they go and get their jab. They don't think about it. Soldiers aren't trained to think. Bless them. They're there to do as they're told. And the officers are no different. You do as you're told. And if every other soldier tomorrow morning dropped dead from myocarditis, all right, the army soldiers still wouldn't join the dots. They'd go, bloody hell, that's pretty amazing. What a coincidence that is. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. I speak to soldiers still. I've got friends in the army still, young friends, your age, in the army. And I say, you don't have to actually take that jab, you know. And they don't respond. They don't know. They just tell the sergeant or the officer tells them to go and get the jab. They go and get the jab. That's how it is.
Doesn't give you much hope, does it?
It doesn't. In the American army, there was a lot of pushback. There are thousands and thousands of soldiers leaving the American army because they won't have it. But it hasn't come here because there's no discussion. You see, the NHS, the MO, the medical officer of the regiment says there's no harm in this jab. So they take it. And now we've even got Sky News the other day, which you'd have said, we've got excess deaths running in unbelievable thousands of ordinary young men dropping dead on the sports field from myocarditis. And with the Sky News are still saying it's a mystery. We don't know what's causing it. You know, and the soldiers watching it go, God, yeah, don't know what's causing it. There are mothers queuing up to have their babies jabbed, all right?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, how stupid are they? It's your baby. It's your baby, and you're having it jabbed full of shit from Big Pharma? What kind of mother are you?
Well, yeah, there is that. So there's no sort of hope really then, Godfrey?
Not in the immediate future.
And there's definitely no hope if you ain't got a couple of quid to get some gold.
You're a little bit in the shit if you've got no money, but let's be honest, you've always been a bit in the shit if you've got no money.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Mr. Bloom. Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I mean, I've sort of run out of questions. If you want to wrap it up there. Right.
Okay, well that's fine. It's been interesting talking to you.
Thank you very much for your time. I thoroughly appreciate it.
It's you're very welcome indeed. I think you do very good work. You know, you're not afraid to get out there with a microphone.
I
you know,
appreciate that too. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, that's good for you. I'm too old for that now, but you're doing a good job. More power to your elbow.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. That's very kind of you to say so, Mr. Godfrey Bloom. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. I'll speak to you again maybe near Easter.
Okay, smashing. I look forward to it.
Okay, toodaloo.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.
Bye.